Hello, Bill here at Pale Horse Survival and Tactical. Today, I've got a little bit of time on my hands for a change, and I decided to go ahead and do a video that I've been wanting to do for a while. Today, I'm going to demonstrate how to process acorns, and also demonstrate how to do a cold leaching process to remove the tannins. What I have right here is acorns. I harvested these about 2 months ago, I guess. These acorns are from a Quercus lobata, or valley oak, and that is in the white oak species. Denoted by the rounded lobes of the leaves. Oaks with pointed lobes are the black oaks. So the white oaks have the lowest amount of tannins. Generally, the smaller the acorn cap, the lower amount of tannins in the nut meat. The larger the acorn cap, the higher the tannin content. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate how to crack these, and how to process the nut meat into a flour, and then I'm going to demonstrate how to leach these out. So, and the leaching process is going to take probably, I don't know, 5 to 7 days roughly. So I'll have to cut this video and come back to it down the road to complete it once we have the leaching process finished. So first off, I harvested these. When you harvest acorns, you want to pick acorns. You can pick, sometimes they'll come down on the ground and you'll have green ones, which is fine. You can snatch those up. Other times they start to turn a nice brown color. You want to have you don't want to pick up ones that are black or ones that look moldy. And if there's a little hole in them in the side, and I have a few here. Here's one right here. That's an acorn, a hole from an acorn weevil. And the weevil adult will bore a hole through there, and they'll actually lay an egg or eggs inside that acorn, inside the acorn, and then they plug the hole up with poo. They actually plug it with their own poo, and you'll notice that if you're ever out acorn hunting, you'll see a little plug of poo coming out of the side of that acorn, and what that is, that's the hole that has been plugged. And what's going to happen is the acorn, the eggs will hatch, and there'll be a larva inside. There will be a worm, and the worm will eat on the meat inside there, and you can still use those acorns if you cut off the, open it up, and like we're going to do on this one, we'll see how bad it is. If you have just a part of it that's bad, you can cut that off and use the rest. Native Americans did it that way. And also, if you have an acorn that has the plug of poo on there, you can actually bury the acorn in a few inches of soil and come back to it after a few weeks or so, and you'll actually have an acorn larva, a grub, and that has crawled out of the acorn, and it'll be gestating, and you actually eat those. In a bushcrafting or survival scenario. They are quite edible. I would recommend cooking them, but they are edible. So we'll take a look at that one. I have a few nut meats here that I have cracked open. Now these are black, but they're still good. And the only reason why they're black is because they have oxidized. And usually that happens when the acorns are dried a little too fast. I've had these inside on a cookie sheet. They've been inside the place here, and it's been a little warm, but those are not spoiled at all. And this is one that I ground up into flour in my mortar and pestle. You see it it lightened up in color. So that's just a surface oxidation there. So the black ones are perfectly fine. Cracking these, I have my stone here, my trusty basalt grinding stone. And the way you crack these open is you take the, set it down on your stone with the pointed side facing up, use a hammer stone and hit it. You'll hear a crack when it splits. Do you hear that? You'll hear that loud crack. Open it up. And I'm obviously not going to sit here and have you guys watch me crack that whole pan of acorns. So we'll just do a few here for demonstration purposes. Whoop, that one took off on me. And when you hit them, and they'll split down the side, you'll hear that crack. Now here's the one. This is the one with the had the acorn weevil in it. We'll bust it open and see how bad the meat is. You can see the weevil ate into the meat. So you can see here that even though it used to have a weevil in it. Just a demonstration. So in a bushcrafting or survival scenario, you're not passing up good food. Here is the spoiled part here, and you can cut that bad part off, and you still have a viable piece. Now here's the rest of the pieces from that same acorn. These are perfectly fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with these. So even though it has a hole and there's a weevil there, you could still bust it open. There's still edible nut meat inside there. They're all not bad. And I'll set this one off the side so I can cut that one bad section out of there. These are perfectly fine here. You can hear that loud crack when it splits. Native American tribes in California subsisted in a large part on acorns. That was their staple. There's so many trees. Now see, now this one's no good. Here's an example of a bad one. This has mold on it. That is no good. You don't want to eat that. And it was interesting that I had the mold because it was sealed. So sometimes you don't know until you open them up. But you definitely don't want to. You don't want to eat the mold. See, this is perfectly fine. That black color is just oxidation. But definitely, you run into something like that, that's a no-no. You can see the fuzz on that. Now after the leaching process is complete in about a week, and I'll know when that is when I give it a taste test. These are perfectly fine here. I'll give it a taste test, and you can tell when the tannins have leached out to an acceptable level out of the nut meat when you give it a taste test and it's no longer bitter. If it's bitter, it has too much tannins in it, and you don't want to eat it. Here's another fuzzy one. That is no good. Getting a lot of them. This is kind of odd. It's another bad one. Not every acorn you open up is going to be good. Those may have gotten wet. When you dry your acorns, and these are perfectly fine here. Those are good. You gather your acorns up, lay them out flat. Don't stack them, don't leave them inside a plastic bag. I actually made that mistake early on when I was learning, and I gathered up a bunch of beautiful acorns from a bur oak, huge acorns, and I left them inside a plastic bag, and I didn't have time to process them, so I figured, well, I'll leave them in the bag and I'll come back to them. And it's a real good looking one here. That's a good one. I figured I'd come back to them, and I left them in the bag, and what happens is in no time at all they mold because the acorns are they're not dry. Fresh acorns have a certain percentage of moisture. There's dampness to them, and I ruined the entire bag. When I opened it up, they had black mold on them, and they smelled all musty, and it really was a bummer. So I had to throw them away, and a whole bag. So that was my learning curve. So whatever container, bag, pouch, whatever you're using to gather your acorns when you're out foraging, as soon as you can, lay them out on a blanket, a sheet, a board, whatever you have, and just let them air dry. Indoors is always good. These have been sitting for a few months, and as they dry, the nut's going to shrink inside the shell. That's how you know they're dry. Native Americans would harvest and store their acorns. For up to a year before they would process them. The aging process has a way of, as they call, sweetening the meat. Also, this is a good one here. So you lay them out flat, don't stack them, and you can put them in your garage, house, wherever, and every couple of days stir them up, move them around, and it won't take long for them to dry. And once they're dry and they're inside the shells, they'll store for some time that way and stay viable. I would say probably up to a year, and before you need to process them. You can process them fresh. If you're in need of the food, you can process them right away. Otherwise, you can store them and they'll dry, and then you can process them that way. We don't want to. There we go. Don't want to crack. Those are good ones. Okay, I'm not going to bore you guys to death watching me crack all those. I am going to process all these today. Now, to process these down, that's the one that had the weevil on it. There we go. That's the little bad section there that I broke off, and this little top section. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly edible. I'm not going to throw that away. Okay, to process these, there's a few different ways. You can chop the nut meat up into small pieces. That is one option. It takes longer to leach the tannins out of the meat if you do it that way. It's best to process it down fairly fine. You don't have to get overly anal. I've seen videos of a few guys, and they just get way too anal processing the nut meat down into a fine flour, you know, and they try to go through and get every little tiny piece. To me, that's just wasted energy and time. It's not necessary. If you can process these down, chopping them and leaching the tannins out, they'll obviously, if you reduce it down to that point, it's going to speed up the leaching process, and this is a perfect consistency. You really don't need to go any better than that. It's just overkill, in my opinion. Now, to process it down, when they're dry, they're fairly hard, and when they're fresh, it's easier to process. Also, there's a membrane on the outside of the nut, and some people remove that, some don't. To be perfectly honest with you, it could be processed with the nut. You're not even going to know it's there. It'll add a little bit of fiber to the nut meat, which isn't a bad thing. We can all use a little extra fiber, and it's not going to contribute or detract from the taste. So in my opinion, you don't have to remove the membrane, and when they're dry like this, you're not going to get it off anyways. When they're fresh, you can peel it off. Very laborious to go through a pile of acorns trying to remove all that. So you can remove it if you want. Personally, I don't, and I've seen other people leave it on, and their acorn meal comes out perfectly fine. Also, once this is leached, I'm going to share with you guys a traditional Native American recipe for a hot cereal. They would make a hot cereal that was very similar to cream of wheat, and I'm going to share with you guys an original Native American recipe for that once this is all leached down, and I will make the cereal on camera in this episode, and do a taste test and everything with it. Maybe put a little honey in there for flavoring or something. So processing this down in a primitive situation, you can use a couple of stones, and you're going to have to beat on this to get it down. If they're dry, it's going to be harder. Fresh ones are much easier to work with. You have to beat on this down, beat this down pretty far until it starts to powderize, and then grind it, and get it as fine as you can, and pour it into your container, and so on and so forth, and work your way through. I have a mortar and pestle here, which is what I use to process this, and it's my old trusty mortar and pestle. So give you an idea how hard these are. Whoops, you see these pieces? I just hit those, and you can hear that piece just break. So after it's leached, I'll spread the mash. It'll still be wet at that point, onto cookie sheets. Spread it out nice and thin, and let it air dry. You could put it in an oven on probably 100-degree heat or so, and hasten the process. But cookie sheets, and just let it air dry, and then that'll be scraped off, and it'll be dried acorn flour, which can be stored for a period of time. The only thing that would really go bad with it would be the oil. Acorn oil that's still in the nut meat, which is the nice thing about cold leaching versus hot water leaching. Some people say, oh, boil them, and the problem with boiling the meal to remove the tannins, you're also boiling out the nutrients. You're boiling out the acorn oil, the fats. The fat is very valuable and very nutritious in a survival or bushcrafting situation. You need that in your diet. These are fairly high calorie, and if you boil it, you're removing a lot of the nutritional beneficial properties. And like I said, you don't have to get overly anal getting every little chunk. That's just overkill. If you watch my videos, you'll see that I always try to keep things very simple, straight, and direct. There's no sense in overcomplicating things. And that consistency is perfectly fine right there. We'll pour that into the bowl. And you're off to the next couple here. It is laborious, and I'm sure there's probably quicker ways of doing this. I put my hand over the top here because I'm hitting these. Otherwise I'm going to have chunks flying everywhere here. And this is time consuming. It does take a while to get everything done, but once you get it leached and the flour, the meal dries, and then you can store that meal. You have a good food source there. You can add it to, eat it as a hot cereal. You can make ash cakes out of it. You can add it to soups. Big difference with bushcrafting, where you process, harvest and process foods and natural resources versus going to the store and picking up something that's already been processed. You just open up a package or a can and it's ready to use. It really takes you back to a very primitive level when sorry about that, telephone. Very primitive level when you have to take it from its raw state and make it usable. It's also very rewarding too. And a lot of this is the ancient skills are, a lot of them have been all but forgotten. You know, people get so used to modern conveniences, and in my opinion, it tends to make them lazy. I like the rewards of, it's very rewarding to do this type of thing. Craft things with your hands and to grow things, get your hands in the soil. It's very rewarding that way. You can see how much that one That's one acorn nut. That is a lot of powder there for just one. And this is what we have already. I mean, that's a fairly decent amount, and I've only processed a couple of these. I've got a whole pile of them here to go through. And everything over here, I figure, you know, a percentage of these will be bad. They'll either be mildewed or whatever, but even if I get half of those, I'm going to have probably, oh, I don't know, by the time I'm done, I may have this bowl almost full. So, anyways, guys, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop the camera here, and I'm going to keep working, processing these down, cracking and grinding them into a meal. And when I get done, I'll come back and I'll show you how much I'll have in the bowl here, and then from there I'll take the video into the leaching process, get that all set up, and then the camera will go off for a while. I'll probably come back and do updates on how the leaching process will be going, and I'll be leaching in this jar here, the cold water leaching. So anyways, I shall return in a while when I'm done here. Stay tuned. Hello, I'm back momentarily. Wanted to share something with you guys. I've got all of the acorns cracked here. These are all shells. Here's all the nut meat. I've got a lot to grind into mash, into flour, and I'm doing it all by hand. I just prefer to do things by hand. I don't like when it comes to a lot of preparation of herbs, and especially when I'm working with primitive materials, I prefer to do everything manually. It's just me personally. But one thing I wanted to share with you guys, one advantage to allowing the acorns to dry to where they shrink away from the inside of the shell, and the early part of this video when I was shaking the acorns around, you can hear them rattling inside. When they dry, they shrink and pull away, but they leave that outer membrane stuck to the inside of the shell. You can see it here. I've seen people taking time to peel, preparing fresh acorns. When they're fresh, they open them up, crack them open, pull the nut out, and they then have to invest time removing that outer membrane, which isn't necessary. You can leave it on there, but I've seen people do that. Well, if you allow the acorn to dry, the nut inside the shell will shrink, and it leaves the membrane stuck to the inside of the shell. It eliminates the problem, the effort of having to remove that if somebody wanted to do so. Anyways, and I've done a little more grinding. Quite a bit of flour in here. It's a pretty fair amount, and I mean, this was very, very few acorns. I don't think I have more than maybe 8 acorns, 9 acorns in here, maybe 10. That's quite a bit. So I have all of this to go, so this bowl will be full, and there may be enough in there for 2 complete bowls. So I'm actually going to get a pretty decent yield out of this. Anyways, wanted to share that with you. I'm going to go ahead and pause the camera again and start processing all of this down, so I'll fade back in a little bit later on. So see you guys in a bit. Hello, welcome back. I got all the nuts ground up, and this is what I have here. I have a pretty good pile, and it smells good. It's actually making me hungry. It has a very pleasant taste. So what we're going to do here is move to the leaching phase, and how we're going to do that, I have a bowl here, And in a primitive situation, you could use a stream, a creek, even a lake, any body of water, or if you don't have access to that, you can use a wooden burn bowl, a bucket, whatever you could utilize. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. I could pour this mash, this powder, down into here, and then fill this up with water. And what's going to happen is this will become waterlogged and sink to the bottom as a drag. And once a day, the water is going to become discolored from the tannins. It'll take on kind of a brownish hue. Water will be cloudy. You decanter the water off once a day very carefully. Pour it off, leaving the mash in the bottom, the dregs, which will be this, and then refilling it with cold water. And do that once a day. Kind of stir it up. Once you fill it up, stir up the dregs at the bottom, and that'll resettle. And do that once a day for 5 days, 6 days. When the water starts to become clear, and when you put a fresh change in, you stir it all up. When the dregs settle out, the water becomes clear, and it's not cloudy or discolored. You know you should be where you need to be. You could take a little bit of a little bit of the dregs. Take a little bit, put it in your mouth. If it's not bitter, you're good to go. If you still have a little bit of bitterness in there, that's the tannins, and that just tells you need to do it for another day or so, or however long it takes to get those tannins down to an acceptable level. The second way of doing this is to pour the ground up nut meat into a bandana, and then bring the sides up, tie it off, and stick it down inside here, and then fill it with water. And the advantage to that is once a day when you go to change the water, you just lift your bandana up out of here, and you can give it a little bit of a squeeze to help squeeze some of the tannins out, and then discard the water, fill it up with fresh, and then stick your bandana containing your mash back in, and give it a soak. And again, the technique is the same. Just after 3, 4, 5 days, change the water out every day, once a day. 4 or 5 days, give it a taste test. Take a little bit, put it in your mouth, see if it's bitter. If it's not bitter, you're good to go. And once we've reached that point, then I'll show you guys how to lay it out on cookie sheets. We're going to dry it into flour, and then we're also going to make a traditional Native American hot cereal out of a little bit of this here. So, and then the rest I don't know, maybe we'll make some acorn cookies or ash cakes or something out of it. So, but we have pretty good. That small amount of acorns actually produced a pretty good yield here. Kind of gives you an idea in a bushcrafting scenario. If you were out and you harvested, 50 pounds or 100 pounds, if you're stocking up for winter, you'd have a lot of food there. So, and the advantage of the cold water leach, you're not leaching the oils and the fats out, so you have all those valuable components still in there. So anyways, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to do this with a bandana, and we'll use the bandana method. So with that said, we'll go ahead and I'm going to throw this into the middle here. It's a pretty good yield. Pretty impressed with the amount here. That's a lot. There's probably I don't know, probably have about there's probably at least a pound. I would say there's a good pound there. Of material. So I'm just going to bring this across like this. There we go, we're all set. I'll stick this in here and fill that up with water, and I'll check in with you guys and give you a few updates as in the coming few days on how we're doing here, and show you the water changes and everything, and then we'll take it from there. So I will see you guys very soon. Stay tuned. Hey, just popping back in here for an update. It's been a couple of days. The acorn flour, the mash, has been soaking in the water here, and still in the bandana. You can see the brown. That's the tannic acid leaching out of the that's all tannic acid there, leaching out of the acorn mash. And I've changed the water. I've poured the water off and replaced it with fresh probably about 4 or 5 times now. So it's about 2 days into it. There's a lot of tannic acid left in there, so it's going to take probably, I would say, 5 to 7 days. I'll keep pouring that off and replacing it with fresh, and when the water starts running pretty clear, then I'll know that the majority of the tannic acid has been leached out, and I'll open up the bandana and give it a taste test. Scoop up just a little bit of the mash, put it on my tongue, and see if it tastes bitter or not. If there's any bitterness, it needs to soak longer. That's always the key. The tannins and the tannins always have a bitter taste. Anyways, I want to give you guys an update. Now this water can be saved, the first few changes, when it's really concentrated like this. The tannic acid is that tannic water is antibacterial, antimicrobial. It's an astringent, makes a good body wash, shampoo in a primitive situation. You can cleanse wounds with it. It's a good mouthwash. It's also antifungal too. Should be effective against nail fungus, ringworm, things of that nature. So just a little bushcraft use for it. And so this is where we sit right now, about 2 days into it. So I'll bounce back probably another couple of days and do another update until we get this leached out and move to the next step. Stay tuned. Hello. Well, I finally completed the leaching process on the acorns. I probably went about a day or two longer than I needed, but I gave it a taste test this evening. They've been leaching for about 6 days or so, and I gave it a taste test, and I can detect no bitterness whatsoever. So I went ahead and pulled the bandana out of the bowl, squeezed out as much water as I could, and I put all the mash on a cookie sheet here, and I'm going to go ahead and let this dry for a few days. I'll use a knife or a spoon or whatever and stir it around and while it's in the drying process. And once we get this dry, I'll go ahead and come back and I'm going to share with you guys that Native American cereal recipe, traditional recipe that they used for an acorn hot cereal. So I will give this a few days to get dry, and I shall return. Stay tuned. Hello, welcome back. Coming to the end of the video here, and I just made a bowl of the Acorn hot cereal, and I promised you guys I was going to share the method of doing this, the way that I know of, through the Miwoks here in California, the Miwok people. The way that this is done is place some water, bring some water to a boil. Depends on the amount of cereal that you're going to make, and put the ground up your processed acorn meal into the water. Bring it to a boil. Boil it for about 10 minutes. Keep stirring it. Don't let it burn. And cut the heat, take it off the burner, cover it, let it sit for 5 minutes. And I made a little bowl of it here. It's actually not bad. It has the same consistency as cream of wheat cereal. A very similar taste to cream of wheat. It's actually not bad at all. And what I did was I had some manzanita berries. Manzanita berries, once they're dry, they're kind of a sweet, tart flavor. Not too tart. They're more tart when they're fresh. But I harvested some this fall, and I ground some up in my, I put 2 berries in my mortar and pestle here, and ground it up and sprinkled a little bit on the for seasoning. I figure that would be a natural seasoning that I would use in a bushcrafting scenario, and it's actually not bad. I just got through making it. It actually tastes pretty darn good. It has a kind of a bit of a nutty flavor to it. Very similar in texture and flavor to cream of wheat. Not bad at all. Pretty happy with how this batch came out. And cold bleaching the acorn mash preserves all of the valuable fat and a lot of the nutrients. You know, some people want to boil the acorns to leach the tannins, and you lose all the fat. You need that fat in a survival or bushcrafting scenario long term. It's very important to have. But it's cold leaching preserves all that along with other nutrients. Boiling will also destroy a lot of the vitamin components also. But it's actually not bad. I would definitely advise everybody to go out and give it a try. And I think you'll have a lot of fun doing it. There's no need. Some people get over. I've watched videos where people get overly ambitious on grinding the acorns down into a very fine flour, and they go through and they invest a lot of time and a lot of effort in getting every little piece ground down. I didn't do that with this. You know, why make things more difficult and invest more energy and calories into it? I went through, I got the majority of it ground down. You seen that earlier in the video. In my opinion, it's not bitter at all. So obviously the tannins leached out of there. It actually came out pretty good. I have a whole cookie sheet full. I have a friend of mine who wants some of this, so I'm going to give him some, and 'cause I'm obviously not going to use it all myself. So, and it does have a shelf life. The fats will be the thing that'll go rancid in it. So if you store it in a container, keep it dry, and of course if you harvest in the fall, if you're in a long-term sustainability situation whether you have a shelter or whatever, keeping it cold shouldn't be an issue in the wintertime. But I would say it would probably have a shelf life of 2 or 3 months or so. Now you can store the acorns whole, which is the way they should be stored. Allow them to dry, like we mentioned earlier in the video. The nut will shrink on the inside and leave the membrane, that little brown membrane that we seen earlier in the video, that'll be stuck to the inside of the shell, so the nut peels itself for you. So there's no need to do that. So traditionally they were allowed to dry. Now if you're in dire straits, you need food, of course, you can skip the drying process. You're still gonna have to leach them to get the tannins out of the nut meat, out of the mash, which is going to take 5 to 6 days to get enough of it out of there to where it's not going to be bitter, and you can ingest that. The tannins, if you ingest a lot of tannins, they can damage your kidneys, so you have to be very mindful of that. But other than that, that's pretty much it. If anybody out there has any personal recipes as far as acorn cereal or whatever, by all means hit me up in the comment section below, or you can email me direct at palehorsesurvival@yahoo.com. I'd love to hear about your recipes or any other ways that you have of processing. I'd love to trade information. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it for you, and hopefully it helps somebody out there in harvesting and processing. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I will see all of you very soon on the next one. Everybody take care. Bye-bye.